Why Media Group? The fastest growing media group in North America.
Around the world that's happening, what we've seen happen with this war that's been taking place for, all of March, starting from February 28th. We have all the latest updates for you. These are big talks that are taking place in Pakistan. We have Vice President J.D. Vance, who is on his way, and this is a big deal because we've seen what we hope was a ceasefire, but things escalating. And of course, in the home front, we have the Liberal Policy Convention taking place right now in Montreal area, and they said that they had the biggest turnout of 4,500 people so far there at the Policy Convention. We're going to bring you all the latest updates, and really what's making headlines there is the latest broadcasting of Marilyn Gladu, who is a ex-conservative MP who crossed the floor right before this convention. So we're going to talk you through what's been going on today. I know this is escalating news that we've seen come out of the Middle East for the past, 40 days. And essentially, if you're wondering what is going on, there was supposed to be ceasefire talks. What is happening between United States, Iran, and Israel? We know that since April 7th, the ceasefire, there were points that Iran had put forward through Pakistan to the United States, about 10 points on ending the war permanently. Really a comeback from the initial proposal from the United States about a ceasefire for 45 days. So in these 2 weeks, it's very fragile because what they had promised on both things, it seems like it is not really coming into fruition. So essentially, the hopes that we have for this talk that's going to take place, tomorrow with Vice President J.D. Vance in Pakistan, we're going to see what that means. Now, this is a huge deal because we know that J.D. Vance has been against the war since last year. He did, put out his statements. We know they campaigned heavily on ending forever wars in the Middle East. So this is something that we're going to see what it means having the vice president there. And perhaps he's going to be someone that is a bit more trusted by the president, President Trump, because last time Oman officials said that Iran and the United States were close to a deal. And Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff went and told the president that not likely so, Israel will go ahead and attack. And then the United States should follow through to be able to prevent casualties from the American side. And this is something that President Trump said he made that decision on February 28th to proceed with the attacks that started this war in Iran. And since then, he's seen the escalations of global oil prices going over $100 a barrel. Essentially, all the other countries that rely on oil from the Middle East through the Strait of Hormuz, that's been, essentially shut down for more than 40 days now, with only some shipments going through and having to ration. We're talking about Japan, who relies 75% of their oil from that region, China 40%, India 60%, and there's the fertilizer, which is huge. It was experts were saying that if this continues, we're looking at mass famine. So oil being a massive issue, but the fact that the fertilizer needs to come out of that region as well was a big deal in terms of what it means for the global economy. So there was leverage there from the Iranian perspective in terms of closing the Strait of Hormuz and attacking their GCC countries just south of the Strait of Hormuz, and not having that level of retaliation back from the GCC countries, although it was, they say it was targeted for the military bases of the United States. But this war has been continuing. So now, as J.D. Vance is on his way to Islamabad, he will join these scheduled talks, and we're going to bring the latest updates for you tomorrow. You want to tune in. We're going to go live to let you know what's going on minute by minute when the vice president joins. And, we finally heard from the new Ayatollah, Mojtaba Khamenei. His father was the previous Ayatollah who was assassinated on those on the February 28th bombings that took place in Iran that really triggered this war. he has, made an announcement on Iranian state media, essentially saying that there needs to be reparations made, and saying that he demands blood money for the martyrs that lost their lives, and he's referring to the top officials that were killed in that bombing, as well as what has continued. So you're not seeing the language of ceasefire or, proper negotiations. Both sides are posturing in terms of that if anything goes sideways, that things could escalate right away. So in a written statement, the Ayatollah said, and which was also shared on Telegram channels, linked to the Ayatollahs, the new Ayatollah Khamenei, and he essentially issued what marked at the 40 days since the death of his father, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who was the former leader. And in this message, he said that he stressed the importance of people taking to the streets, what you've been seeing, I think, coming out of Iran for the past little while. You're seeing now, if you recall, on April 7th, on the day that President Trump said would have been the end of a civilization unless there's a ceasefire to open up the Strait of Hormuz. And you saw Iranians going to their power plants, surrounding the power plants, surrounding the bridges, all the locations that the president said would be bombed to end a civilization, never to be returned again. I think those words will haunt him in the future, because those are massive words in terms of war crimes that the Democrats are right now, gathering their impeachment articles for those reasons. But if you recall, those images came out, and even yesterday and earlier today, we've seen images of people on the streets essentially now mourning the late Ali Khamenei, the previous Ayatollah. And because that mourning process usually goes for 40 days once when an Ayatollah passes away. And because it was wartime, that didn't really happen the same way. So we're seeing that happen now. And the new Ayatollah is telling people to go to the streets and making sure that their presence are in the squares, and it is seen, because this is part of the ongoing negotiations. Perhaps the images and the videos that came out of Iran with the people standing on the bridges and around the power plants was fairly powerful. Perhaps that had something to do with the negotiations and in terms of the ceasefire that took place on April 7th, because if you can imagine the threats of a nuclear superpower such as the United States saying that they're going to bomb those infrastructures, and if any sort of visuals came out with people around it, it wouldn't be a distant thing, then it would be a personal thing. And how the world would react to that would be very severe when you can actually see lives lost. I mean, right now, when you see on mainstream television or in newspapers or online, you're seeing destruction after the fact. And as you see things destruct, you don't actually see people standing around like those visuals that were coming out of Iran. So that would have been something that would really edge into your memory about what war is and what it means for people who are casualties of war. So the Khamenei, Ayatollah Khamenei essentially said in his statement, and I'm going to say it verbatim, he says, "We have not been and are not seekers of war. However, we will by no means relinquish our rights. And in this regard, we view the entire axis of resistance as a unified front." So really saying, our pulse is still on the trigger. And this is what we've also heard from President Trump. The new leader has not made a public appearance since his father's death. This is when he lost his essentially entire family in that bombing. It is said that he has wounds, and he's been getting treatment in the city of Qom, but no one has seen him. So it's the questions around who is running Iran. Is the top supreme leader at the helm of things? I mean, we know that there's this statement, and there was a previous statement when he was chosen to be the next Ayatollah. So that is to be seen in terms of what is happening in the region. And we know that the foreign affairs minister of Iran, he's very, front and center in terms of giving interviews, and he's going to be part of these negotiation talks. But in terms of seeing who the Ayatollah is, is the supreme ruler really running the country and calling, the shots? That's to be seen. We've only heard from letters. There was a video. That was released where it appeared, this is days ago, where Ayatollah Khamenei was, walking to what would be somewhat of a situation room, and there was a map on the board, and it looked like an Israeli site where their nuclear capabilities are. And so, in a way of a warning, I guess, to Israel and the United States and the world. A lot of people say that those were deep fake images, but essentially, Iran did not say it's deep fake. But the point that it was making is that, there will be retaliation, and that's to be seen. So now the ceasefire is under strain because Israel has continued their heavily bombing in Lebanon, even though this came, a day before where the Israeli prime minister said that they're going to have talks with Lebanon and this is going to take place. And this was obviously welcomed because there was a lot of criticism in terms of Israel not proceeding its military strikes in Lebanon as part of the 10 points that Iran had asked for ceasefire. So, very wishy-washy in terms of what were those 10 points? Did both sides agree to the same 10 points? And if so, who is reneging first? Because President Trump said, Lebanon was not part of it. And Iran says, yes, very much so, it was part of it. So there's that sort of discrepancy in terms of, we know that Pakistan was in between making these deals and, of course, backed by China and Saudi Arabia and its allies. So it's unknown in terms of, is this miscommunication? Because rarely, when you have the escalations we saw in those 40 days, and when you have ceasefire, those rules of the terms are abided by, which is what builds trust, then to go into negotiations on coming to some sort of peace treaty and what it would mean between the countries involved. But right off the bat, Strait of Hormuz was not open, and Lebanon continued its strikes on Lebanon. Sorry, Israel continued its strikes on Lebanon, which is, Hezbollah is a proxy of Iran. And that's why Iran cannot, sever their ties, and Lebanon needs to be included in the ceasefire plan. So now, when when you're hearing what's happened at the latest after the ceasefire, you had Israel, famously said within 10 minutes they did 100 strikes in Lebanon, and we know that Lebanon did say that it hit Beirut, and the casualties are growing. Now, the latest numbers is that with the bombardments of Israel continuing in Lebanon, and this is they started with the southern region of Lebanon, essentially saying that they're going to occupy that land up to the Tani River. And then there was bombs in Beirut, but so far the numbers of casualties is 300 people, have been killed, and when it comes to injuries, it's 1,100 people. And this is strikes that have been taking place this week alone, and we're talking after the ceasefire agreement. Now, if you move forward to the talks in Pakistan, well, the expectations are low. And why is that? Essentially, U.S. and Iran, are going to meet there. And, Pakistan's goal here is, hey, they brought the two parties to the table. There may not be an immediate deal, but essentially the important point is that their talks are continuing. When both sides were bombing one another, there were, President Trump said, oh, we're talking to high officials. Iran was saying, no one's talking to us. And then there was a point where President Trump would not disclose who they're talking to in the Iranian administration, saying it was someone high up because of fear of assassinations. We know that very high-level people in Iran, in the Iranian regime, have been assassinated in this war. It has really hugely impacted Iran's capabilities and set it back significantly, not only with infrastructure, but if you look at it in a big picture sense, the regime, the Ayatollah that was assassinated, and the very high officials, those were traditionally people in that administration, in that regime, that had agreed to not enriching uranium for the purposes of nuclear activity. And those were the same officials that were in talks with Omani officials to try to reach a deal, since we saw the escalations take place last year in that 12-day war. So now those are all gone. You have a new Ayatollah whose family has been assassinated in those bombs, and he's saying that he wants blood money and really not backing down. We haven't seen him, so we don't know who's actually pushing that narrative, if it's him or if it's other figures. It is unknown. All we can do is we can assume that it is coming from Ayatollah. And this was in defiance of choosing him to be the next Ayatollah, because President Trump did say that they would have to give permission of who would be the next ruler, and that the United States and Israel would take that person out. So we've seen massive defiance from the Iranian regime all through and throughout. So now we have Iran's Foreign Affairs Minister, Abbas Araghchi, who says that if U.S. is willing, and this is a statement in terms of really calling out this war between the three nations, saying that if the U.S. is willing to crater its economy in continuing to allow Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to kill diplomacy by not rendering to a ceasefire, what would Washington's choice be? And essentially saying that, saying what we're hearing, from the American media, as well as a lot of the top previously Republican conservative anchors, such as, Megyn Kelly, Tucker Carlson, and the rest of them, who were very pro-Trump, who campaigned for him and really defended him on so many different things, and are now really speaking up against this and saying that, it is Israel's influence, and essentially saying President Trump was co-opted into this war. Now, he is the, head of a superpower, a super nation, the world's biggest economy. And you have to assume that if the people elect this person to be, the guy in charge, that they would not necessarily be co-opted. But this is to be seen in terms of what will come now and how history will write this entire thing, because we are in the middle of making history in terms of the geopolitical movements of things, who's becoming a power player. And I don't like to use the words of like winners and losers of a war, because we're talking about casualties. But when you look at certain countries who have benefited from this war that's taken place and the ones that have not, we're going to go into breaking all of that down for you. We're going to have a very live coverage tomorrow as these talks take place in Pakistan, and really talk about, did China fare well in this whole thing? What sort of positives were there for the Chinese economy during this entire war? What about Russia? What does it mean for Russia? What about Iran? And really taking a look at the United States and Israel and these key players. Of course, we're not talking about the European Union or Canada, because essentially they really stayed out of all of this. So those will definitely break down, because it'll be a very interesting piece to be able to look at everything from the total perspective, but individual countries as well. Now, when it comes to Iran, well, they're saying that there's a trust deficit, and same with President Trump, because it's been very negligible on both sides in terms of where this peace talks are. And now when it comes to the spillover that we're seeing in the region, we've seen that Iran has now also targeted Kuwait facilities. This is continuing. Iran is saying, that they want a toll, and they're only allowing certain ships to go through when it comes to Strait of Hormuz. And President Trump said that they're not being as transparent as they promised they would be to be able to open it up. Now, the question remains, is this, diplomatic talks, is this just a way to buy time so everyone can reposition? Or is this really going to lead to something? Because when you look at what the 10 points are, and if possibly, if United States would allow it, is a big question. We know that the 10 points include massive things that were never, ever on the table before when it comes to Iran, even prior to this war that started. So now that they are on the table, and President Trump said he will take a look to see, if he would negotiate on it, we're talking about massive things like, compensation for damages. What does that look like? How do you get compensation? We're talking about Iran is, proposing to be able to formalize its control of the Strait of Hormuz. It did not have control of the Strait of Hormuz, and it's saying that it would like to charge fees with Oman and to be able to recuperate the damages. It's talking about enriching its uranium and having a nuclear program. It's saying that now it needs to, because before it was in talks and it got attacked, and now it needs to. And mind you, this is a new leadership at the helm of the Iranian regime, and their ideas may be different than the previous ones that have essentially been eliminated, and of all the top ones. And full sanctions removal. So this is massive. Sanctions have been on Iran since 1979. And to recognize Iran as a nuclear nation, this is something that's been very scary for the likes of Israel and other countries, because they say, hey, this is a country that is funding terrorism all throughout, and for them to now have nuclear capabilities, it would make them absolutely unstoppable. And then to have access to control the Strait of Hormuz, which controls 20% of the world's energy and fertilizer, and then the southern part of the Red Sea, which is another chokehold that they are trying to get access of. That's another 5%. So that's saying, Iran would be essentially responsible for 25% of world's oil consumption, and it overnight repositions Iran in a completely different way. And what does that mean for the local GCC countries such as Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, UAE, Oman? Where do they fare? And what does that mean for the U.S. petrodollar, right? In terms of U.S. having control of having trade in USD, which really contributes to the ability of a strong dollar, but as well as having regional influence by having the military bases. So huge things that I don't know if the United States would agree to. And of course, the regional influence, such as Lebanon, is on the table. And since the bombs are continuing by the Israeli forces, this is the point of contention. Now, President Trump did say he doesn't want the stockpiling. He doesn't want the enrichment of uranium to continue. President Trump did make those things clear. So we'll see if Vice President J.D. Vance is able to come to some sort of terms in all of this, and if really Lebanon and Israel are going to meet and have some sort of a dialogue. It seems like we're asking for these countries to get along and to be able to find a pathway so it doesn't affect the global community. It doesn't, lives are not lost. But sometimes you almost think that perhaps they're saying they're going to meet because they're trying to show, hey, I had the bigger gesture to be able to have diplomatic talks. This other country doesn't like it, so therefore we must continue with the war. So unfortunately, and hopefully it's not that case, that things are not just for show. Yes, the devastation has continued. I don't think they could continue for this war for much longer to be able to restart it again the way it was escalating in those 40 days. But nothing is off table, because it seems like the things each side is asking for is far reaching, and there's no trust. And if there's no trust, who will guarantee the trust between the two nations? Can there be really other countries who can vouch for them? When you don't have, for example, good credit and you want to rent, anything. Well, if you don't have good credit, usually you need a guarantor who has good credit to go on the papers with you, and to be able to say, yes, if so-and-so is not able to make their payments, then I, as their guarantor, will cover the expense, right? Same thing happens when somebody goes to jail and needs to get a bail. Usually there's a guarantor for that person not to, to abide by the terms because of bail. So in this case, when it comes to United States, Israel, and Iran, who's going to be the guarantor? Because it seems like if either side doesn't trust each other, and for good reason, because they haven't followed through on both sides, then what country or countries, or is it going to be yeah, exactly, a bunch of countries who are going to guarantee it, and how could they? And that country needs to have, obviously, a good pathway to the president, as well as to the Iranian regime, and as well as to Israel and key players, to be able to keep everybody on side. And that is a full-time job of its own, because the geopolitical situation keeps changing and escalating. And we've seen that play out in these, since President Trump has returned back to office. So these are critical things to be able to really take a look at and break it down. And, what was shocking yesterday was First Lady Melania Trump. And this was massive headlines. And, this happened in the middle of this entire war discussion when First Lady Melania Trump did a press conference. Well, I wouldn't even call it a press conference. She made an announcement. She didn't take any questions, but this sent, shockwaves in Washington, D.C., that the First Lady held her own sort of statement, a press conference for a statement, where she said that, because there's been, lots of things happening on social media talking about her in terms of her connection to Epstein. Was she Jeffrey Epstein's victim? Did Jeffrey Epstein introduce her and Donald Trump, her husband? These were all things that she addressed. And in the speech that she gave for a few minutes, essentially, it was shocking, but, she looked like she was, upset. Her voice was shaky. At some point, she was swerving a little back and forth. She kept her face down, reading, her statement, and essentially calling out, people who are saying that about her, who are defaming her character, and saying that, she did know Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell because of the party circuits they go to, whether it's in Palm Beach or in Florida. And given that, she also said that, because, when the files, the Jeffrey Epstein files, were being released by the Department of Justice, there was an email in there from Melania Trump to Ghislaine Maxwell, essentially very cordial type of friendly email. And she said that that was just natural correspondence, and that had nothing to do, with her knowledge of what they were up to, what Jeffrey Epstein's crimes were, and his conspirators, referring to Maxwell. Then she did even go as far to say that Congress needs to allow the victims of Jeffrey Epstein to have their full day and to talk about what's happened to them, and it needs to be fully investigated. What happened? Well, President Trump said, he was blindsided that the First Lady was going to hold a press conference of that nature. When I say press conference, I mean inviting the press, giving her a speech, written, reading it from paper, not taking any questions, and stepping back. So this is unheard of. This administration, we're seeing a lot of things that are unheard of. We can break down what the connections between Epstein, President Trump, and how some of this stuff has been escalated. Of course, we know that before this war, it was all about Epstein every day, 24 hours a day, because of the mass amount of files and emails and pictures that came out from the Justice Department. I mean, it was just endless to be able to look at those documents, which Pam Bondi lost her job over, but there's also speculation that there might have been another reason why she was let go of the top job. So you want to stay with us to talk about all of these details when it comes to this war. What does it mean for the United States, Israel, and Iran? And we're going to keep all of that going for you. You want to tune in at the night show as well as tomorrow as well. So coming across back to Canada here in the home front, we know that the Liberals are having their policy convention, and they even said they want to be very, cautious about the type of, policies they put forth, because there is a by-election, there is 2 seats, Bill Blair's old seat in Scarborough Southwest, and Krista Freeland's old seat, University of Rosedale, are up for grabs. These are Toronto seats, and because there were Liberal seats, it's assumed they might go Liberal. It is to be seen. We're going to only know by the exit polls on Monday. And then there is a Montreal area seat as well, which was also Liberal. So let's see. This party, the Liberal Party, the governing party, is only one seat shy of majority. And so this is, big deal. I think the latest headlines that are coming out of what's happening at this policy convention are all about Marilyn Gladue, the Ontario MP who crossed the floor, who really voted on conservative, social conservative issues. And I'll break that down for you, what that means, and her having to tell the prime minister that she will vote with the Liberal Party on, the social issues like abortion and gay rights and everything else that she was essentially, not voting with in her record of being a conservative MP for 10 years. She said this is good for her riding, this is good for the country, and this is good for herself. She said in the last 10 years, she essentially became an MP after Stephen Harper lost that election and the Conservatives were no longer in power in 2015. So she's saying in the last 10 years, I haven't been able to get any funding for my constituency. And they're saying, hey, you're doing a great job, you're working really hard, but we really need the funding. What does that really tell you? That tells you that Canadians who give their tax dollars to our government, it seems like what that is signaling, and we've seen this from, many ways, is that, the federal government that is in power is, taking the tax dollars. Of course, they have their annual budget, but then when it comes to allocating funds to different constituencies, does it go to their own party's constituencies where they have a member of parliament representing them? And if that's the case, then that really makes a case for MPs wanting to be in government, because if they can only get funding for their constituencies to really help with the local and regional issues, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's building the infrastructures that need to take place, or other fundings for groups and programs, if that's the case, then, we're really looking at how a sitting government is using tax dollars to really boost their own party and their own seats, and making sure that certain seats in terms of ridings stay, their own, because they get the funding and everything else. You're seeing that happen with Pierre Poilievre. When he lost his seat in an Ottawa area riding, which he had for 20 years, they elected a Liberal. And the constituents, some of them said, well, we haven't had much funding here. We haven't had what we needed. And he's been representing us for 20 years. So this is something what Marilyn Gladue really ends up highlighting, saying that she is going to be able to get funding for her riding now that she is a Liberal MP, even though she was elected as a Conservative MP, which in retrospect, now you have Pierre Poilievre, who's the leader of the Conservative Party, really pushing back. And he's talking about what he says should be a recall petition to remove MPs who switch parties, saying that, you ran an election under a party banner, promising certain policies that your party would, implement if being elected. And now you're elected under that party banner. Volunteers came out for you. People donated to you for the cause, for the leader of the party, for the messaging of the party. And you ran under a certain brand banner, and now you've decided to change. And so therefore there should be a recall, essentially recalling that MP and having a by-election, essentially calling it like a vacant seat, right? So when an MP steps down, it becomes a vacant seat, and therefore there's a by-election. And then all the registered parties can put forward their candidate. He's saying, if you're going to cross the floor, then we should be able to recall you so you're no longer an MP, and then we should hold a by-election. Now, do you agree with that, with the points he's making? Because he's seeing that, this is a case where he's lost 4 MPs from the Conservative caucus going over the Liberals. And there's talks that there's at least another 9 to 10 more who are asking the floor crossing MPs from the Conservative Party to the Liberal Party they're saying that they're being asked questions from other Conservative MPs about what it's like being in the Liberal caucus. So, this is something that he's seeing as a strategy to say, we need to be able to stop this, because if MPs knew that there was a repercussion of them being recalled and not on the ballot to run in a by-election, then maybe they wouldn't cross the floor. Interestingly enough, Marilyn Gladu actually was supporting that motion back in January, and now in April, early April, she crossed the floor. So, that's really been what's taking hold of what's happening in this policy convention. I think that's been the biggest headline in terms of all the talking points, really, I guess, sidelining some of the policy that they're going to be discussing. But fear not, tomorrow we're going to go over what, tomorrow's the last day of the convention, policy convention, and we're going to go over what the Liberals have decided in terms of putting things forward. It is Mark Carney's first policy convention, and he, walked in with delivering yet another Conservative MP. Up to now, he's had 5 MPs cross the floor. So that's, that says a lot in terms of where caucus is putting their trust, even, across party lines. And so, just to recap, you had first in November of 2025, you had Chris Edmond. He is the 3rd-term MP. He was a Conservative MP from Nova Scotia, across the floor. Then you had Michael Ma, who was a Conservative MP who crossed the floor in December, right before, the end of the year, 2025. And he was a first-term MP, so he wasn't even at the job for a full year. He crossed the floor. Matt Jarneau, he's a 4th-term MP in Alberta, which is the Conservative heartland. He crossed the floor in February 2026. Then you had NDP, Lori Illout, who crossed the floor last month. It seems like every month, November, December, February, March, just shy of no floor crossings in January. But in March, you had, NDP cross the floor, who serves all of Nunavut. And then now in April, you had an Ontario area MP cross the floor. So it's to be seen what that means. Now we want to watch out for Monday night. You want to tune in with us to see what happens in those 3 seats. And in this by-election, this could be what we would see Mark Carney getting a majority beyond what is expected. It is only 1 seat remaining that needs to, he's only 1 seat shy of majority. So he might get 3 more. So right now, the count is that Liberals are 171, Conservatives are at 140, NDP's at 6 seats, the Bloc is at 22 seats, the Greens are at 1, and the 3 vacant seats, if they go Liberal, they will push Mark Carney's majority to 174 seats. So therefore, he's able to push through what he wants in the House of Commons. Now, some of the key issues that, have been discussed for policy, number one is being, the Liberal policy, convention policy is, setting a minimum age for at 16 years old for social media usage. What does that mean? That essentially is a goal to protect youth from mental health harm. Us growing up, if you recall, anyone before social media age and before, smartphones, we didn't really have access to all the content that you can see online. And it was days where you actually go outside and you play. Yes, there was video games, but not to the level of what you see now, with its graphics and everything else, and having access to internet and playing with, players from all over the world. Internet really wasn't that, big of a forefront. There was no smartphones, and there was no social media. So, as a child, you go out and you play, and the most you know about the world is through your friends, through the school, the community that you're in, and your family, and, your extended family. That is really the world that a child grew up in. And now, fast track to current day, people can, having internet access everywhere and anywhere, whether it's on the iPad, on your tablet, on the smartphone, on their computers, and streaming services and televisions with hundreds and thousands of channels. I mean, back then you had like maybe 30 channels and you watched maybe 2. And there was family programming that you watched with your family at 8 p.m., on a Thursday or Friday night. And you had, remember, America's Funniest Videos was like something you'd watch with your family. And you watch some cartoons on Saturday morning and Sunday morning. That was how things were. Or the programmings for children when you come home from school at 4 o'clock. You get home at like 3, you have your snack and you watch, whether it's like Flintstones or, Inspector Gadget or any of those things. I mean, I'm talking about those cartoons that played at 4 p.m. And then before you start your homework, that was what a child did. And an early teenager also did, right? And really that was it. And instead of chat messaging and text messaging, you wrote notes in class that you tried to pass to your friends to read it, hiding it from the teacher. And really, the note that you would receive between recess and classes was the chat messaging that you're seeing now. That was life. And now, when you fast track to today, and a youth is like going online and seeing how you're supposed to look at 13, at 14, at 15. We know that online predators have moved on to Facebook and Instagram, where Facebook was just charged hundreds of millions of dollars in the United States because it was found negligent for allowing predators to be predators of underage children and to traffic them, and using Instagram stories to promote it, and then going into chats, in the private chats, to be able to configure logistics and pricing and all of that. So children are in harm's way because now they're putting themselves out there. And what do you really do on social media? You put a bunch of your own pictures and what you're doing and where you're going. You're really promoting, a lot of your own life, really saying, here I am, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm up to. That is what social media is. Yeah, you may every now and then, take the opportunity to raise a cause or highlight someone else, but really social media, whether on any of the platforms, it's your opinions. If it's on X, it's your opinions. If it's on Instagram, it's your pictures or what you find inspiring or where you are. If it's on Facebook, it's all kinds of those things, right? And if it's on TikToks, it's your own videos of what you're doing. Rarely are you taking videos of other people. You're creating content. And so when you have young people putting themselves out that way, and then you have, the world just available to them in terms of this war and, other things, that what they should strive for, how they should be, well, that is going to create mental health concerns for them, because the exposure is at such a great level that we didn't have. I mean, I personally didn't have to face that. I didn't have to think about, oh, I'm 13 years old. What does a 13-year-old girl look like? How does she dress? What are the latest cosmetics you should buy at Sephora? Because that's, aged for them. There was none of that exposure. And so there was none of that mind games of, am I enough? Am I enough? Because that's what it comes down to. Am I enough? And then, the concept of FOMO, fear of missing out, is what social media creates, is this whole thing of this curated lifestyle of, look what I'm doing, look what I'm all about. And then it creates that FOMO from other people. And then, so if the mental health aspect of it is that, looking at yourself and creating insecurities about, I'm not enough, and I need to do this or I need to get that to be enough, which is a psychological mind. It's a psychological mind war in many ways, because it just gets ingrained at such a young age to just not be enough. When you look at other people and how perfect they look, or their talents, or the cool things they get to do, it is very destructive. And if you are harnessing that at an early age and supporting that at an early age, then what does that do for a middle-aged adult? Having all those issues such as weight, right? Am I the right weight, or am I overweight? Do I have what's in trending in terms of clothing? And for girls, it's all about, is my hair the certain way? Take me to the hair salon. Do I have the right makeup? Well, that is money spent on, procuring makeup. on skin that is absolutely perfect. A girl in those ages has absolutely like flawless skin. And what makeup does is actually, you're putting chemicals on, a young skin with, minimal pores and just the beauty of being a child and a young woman. And so there's exposure of that. And then there's the clothing, the certain brands that are cool. Is it Alu? Is it, Lululemon? What is the latest brand? I must have it. The latest shoes. And then it's just, and then of course the latest trends, such as the big cups, or the what Sephora put out with I'm forgetting some of these brands that I hear my niece talk about. And and it's just, and it starts with, I need to get the lip smackers is an old brand. I forget the new brands names, but it's all about, starts with like the lip care kit, and then it goes on to, oh, just a little bit of blush. And then it goes on to, well, you must have face wash and toner and moisturizer. And then you're watching these beautiful young people using, all of these products that they didn't need the day before their minds became aware that these products exist and you can look like this and you can be attractive. And what they're selling is popularity, if you use these products and if you're wearing the latest trends and if you are doing all these things. And of course, there's never enough. It's the latest, devices. Do you have the latest iPhone? Do you have the latest tablet? And it's just, it goes on and on and on and on and on from there. So there needs to be, of course, a discussion. And at this liberal policy convention, they're discussing about setting a minimum age. I'm not talking, these are not laws. Okay. This is just members of the Liberal Party who are talking amongst themselves about certain policy ideas that then, you have the Liberal Party take into consideration if they're going to pursue and, create an act and go through legislation and get Senate approval and so on and forth. These are just ideas for policy. So they're talking about minimum age of 16 for social media. That's to protect the mental health harm, online addiction. That's the other thing, right? The scrolling, what is it called? Doom scrolling, where you don't even realize that you've been scrolling for an hour plus. Where did your time go? Where did your attention go? What happened, right? There's that whole thing. And of course, there's harmful content, right? And that can be everywhere. The other items are about AI chatbot and concerns that, young users are interacting with AI without safeguards. And what is AI saying to them? We know that AI is still fairly new. We are talking about super intelligence, but we also know that, it is a model that is learning, and therefore it can give you some false sort of suggestions and really make some mistakes, because it is a model that needs to learn on human behavior and over time get smarter. And so, there's that whole interaction with, now, are you talking to a human being? Is it an AI chatbot? And what are you talking about? Are you talking about the things that are upsetting you? Of course, it's good to talk. I think for human beings, it's good to have friends to talk to, or someone that you can confide in. But even at those ages, when you're going through, the hormonal changes and, and lack of experience in the world and how difficult and how big things can become, it is natural to turn to a friend. And if not a friend, then perhaps now what we're seeing in AI chatbot and AI, ChatGPT, and other platforms that could really give you advice about what you're going through. Some really great things, others not so. But the difference is in terms of having discernment. When you're an adult and you have had some world experience, you have some discernment about what the chatbot is telling you, what AI is telling you, versus from your own experience. But when you're a child and you're trying to make sense of this world, and you're dealing with your own hormonal changes and your immediate environment of your home, siblings, what's happening at school, the pressures of everything else, and the pressures of social media, then it's a field of just untapped potential of what could go well and what could not. So those are great conversations to have in terms of the online harms of misinformation, disinformation, and what that means in terms of how it's, really allowing a young person to make up their mind about certain issues and everything else. So those are on top of the agenda. Mind you, those are just what's being discussed. The headlines really are the floor crossings, and really by Monday, this party could be in majority territory, not needing any other parties to really prop itself up to pass the legislation it needs to. So that's what's happening here in Canada, and you want to stay with us in the Ymedia newsroom to hear all the latest details. That's all the time we have today, but we're going to be back again tomorrow, and we're going to go over what has been happening and transpiring in Pakistan when it comes to this war, as well as what's happening here in Canada. I'm Ramona Singh. Until next time, take care and be well.
Ymedia Group, the fastest growing media group in North America.